Welcome to Coding with Tom. Today we're going to be using the new feature that lists have in iOS 14 to include nested items inside of the row items. Then we will be adding a custom action where we will be able to swipe the nested cells and rate the restaurant. We will also be fetching all of this information from a mock server instead of having hard-coded data. Let's start by creating our application. We're going to do a new one today. And it's going to be a SwiftUI app. Now in this case, we're not going to be using hard-coded data for our mocks. We're going to be using a server that we're going to be running locally. So in the project, you're going to find this restaurant API. Let's run the mock server. And you will see if we hit this localhost restaurants endpoint, we're going to get a JSON back. So we're going to get the data from this JSON and we're going to transform it into our model entities. So our first step is going to be creating the model. Okay, so this is our model. It matches the results that we're going to get with our JSON. Now, to easily transform all of this into the JSON data, we're going to make our structs conform to the decodable protocol. In order for a struct to be decodable, now all of its types, its attributes need to be of another decodable type. Now string is decodable. It's complaining right now because restaurant isn't. So let's do the same for restaurant. It's also going to complain because of rating. Now rating is decodable because int and string are decodable. And now so is restaurant. And so is restaurant category. This will allow us to easily decode the JSON that we're getting back from our endpoint. So let's go to our service. This is how we query a get endpoint. We just create a URL with the address. Then we ask the shared URL session for a data task. For that, we pass a URL request, which is just passing in the URL, and then a completion handler for that. This one has the data that you get back, the response, and an error if something occurred during the transaction. What we're doing inside the completion is just making sure that the data, that we're actually getting data back. And then here is where the decodable protocol comes in. We create a JSON decoder and decode the data. Now we're decoding an array of categories, of restaurant categories, because that's what we're getting back from our endpoint. After creating a data task, this is not enough to run the endpoint. You actually have to call data task.resume, and that will be calling this endpoint and fetching the data. Now keep in mind that a while ago, Apple started forbidding the call of HTTP. So in our info plist, we need to add an exception so that it allows us to actually query this. Let's give it a try on appear of this view. So it should be 4 restaurant categories. Let's run this and see what happens. Here we have our 4. So before we start with the UI, we also need to import some new images. Yep. And with that, we are ready to start our view. We're not going to do with our content view. Let's delete this one and let's create our first scene. Okay, so this is what we're going to have. We're going to have an item which will have an ID, and then we'll have 2 types of items. The category, which is going to be the first row that we're going to present for each category. So the first row is going to be a category, and then the items inside are going to be restaurant view models. Both of them are going to be items, and this ID is what we're going to use in the list since it needs identifiable items. So each one, we're going to assume the ID for the category is the name. So no category is going to have duplicated names. And for the restaurants, we're just going to use the ID that our mock server gives us back. Oh yeah, also because we're going to have children, so each of the items in this list is going to be, each of the rows, it's going to be, need to be of one type, but that type needs to have children in case we're going to be nesting items, which is, this is the case. The category are going to have nested items, which are restaurants, and the restaurants are not going to have nested items. So we're going to create this row item. This one needs to be identifiable. And it's going to have 2 things, an item, and then the children of that item, which are also going to be row item. And this is optional because not everybody has children. Then the ID, we're going to just return the ID of the item, be it a restaurant or a category. And our observed item is going to actually be an array of raw items. Because what we're doing is retrieving the categories and then transforming those categories and restaurants into an array of raw items that our view model is going to have. Now, eventually, we're going to be simulating the rating of a restaurant. For that, I'm going to create a function here. And we're just going to be printing the name of the restaurant we rated. Okay, so our first step is our initial view in the app won't be the content view, it will be the categories. It's going to be complaining here. And let's also replace this with. Okay. So here what I'm doing in the preview is using dependency injection. For our preview, we're going to be adding a mock restaurant service that doesn't need to query an endpoint actually, but has hard-coded mock data. And with that, we will be able to render our preview. Okay, so here we have our list for now. It's just with the mock data that we have here in the preview, but you can see how just by specifying the children in the list view, we have our nested list. Now let's create a view for the categories and for the restaurant. You're gonna notice that the cell sizing here isn't doing it much justice, so we're gonna specify a default size for our cells. See how this looks. Yeah. Now you use our UI kit exercise that mirrors this app. We had a swipe action where we swipe from left to right, and we had a rate action here. Now we do not have this default behavior in this. We cannot add swipe actions as easily. We could add the delete function, but for any other custom things, we need to do it ourselves. So we will create a view modifier that will add leading and trailing actions to a cell, and it will make it swipeable. To our Swipeable modifier, we're going to pass the action. So a swipe action will have a title, an icon name as an SF symbol, and the action that we're going to perform when tapping. We will also have a content height, since the Swipeable modifier will add the actions that will have the same height as the view that we are making swipeable, and the content width will be 80% of the height. And then as we swipe, what we'll be really doing is modifying the offset of this view so that the swipe actions that we're going to be drawing behind are going to be seen. I'm going to start by drawing the actions on top, just so that we can see how each one of them will be drawing, and then we'll switch the order in the C stack. Okay, so here you have how it's going to see. Let's actually make this a little bit smaller. Yeah, much better. So this is how the actions are going to look behind the cell. So let's move all of this up. Now, when we swipe the content, we'll start revealing this. We'll also add a tap gesture to the content. So if the cell is swiped where we are revealing an action, as soon as we tap, it will reset the state. And then we will have our gesture. So the drag gesture has two modifiers that we can add, and on change. So this is going to be called each time as the user drags the finger, the value will be changing. Okay, so sliding from left to right is very easy because we know that the starting point is going to be 0. And then as the user is dragging, we're just going to be using the location of that gesture, the X location, to modify the offset. Now remember, we're only going to let the user swipe if we have leading actions. If we don't have, then it's always going to be 0 and this will never be translated. The difficult part will come when we're sliding from right to left because as SwiftUI is a declarative view, we do not know the total width of the cell, nor is it needed to add a geometry reader for that. That would only complicate stuff. Instead, what we're going to do is we're going to use this variable that I created, which is the previous trading point. We're going to be using it to calculate the offset with our drag. So we're going to have 3 states here. When we start dragging, for the first time, that will be if the offset is 0. This will be the second time we call the update, when the previous trading point is 0. This may happen when we reset the state or when the user stops dragging, when we stop swiping. When we have a cell visible, then the offset will be 0, but because the drag gesture ended, the previous point will be 0. And then for every other state, we'll be calling this. So this is basically what we're doing here is, when we start the swiping, it's just a matter of setting the first point where the user is placing the finger, and the offset is just the translation width, which is just the amount of distance the user has swiped so far for this first update. Then we'll just be calling this, which is just the offset. We add the difference between the previous point where we recorded the gesture and the new point, and then we keep updating, and that's it. So here what we're doing is first we check from what direction we're coming from, and then we just round. We will just calculate the distance. So what will be the minimum? What's the minimum distance if it's the maximum amount of actions that we have by the content width, or is it the offset? We take that minimum, and then with the final offset, we just near it to the nearest corner by dividing the distance by the content width. We round that, and that we multiply by the content width. Let's try that in the preview. You can see I'm dragging way past this. I'm gonna let go, and it's gonna swipe back. Let's drag a little bit more here, and there we have it. As soon as we tap an action, we are resetting the state. Same goes here when I tap the content, it's resetting the state. So we have our two actions, stop on whatever. Now let's apply this Swipeable Modifier to our restaurant row. Here we have our swiping function. We cannot swipe from right to left because we didn't add any trailing action. Now let's try running the app. Here we can see the output. Try this one. Here we have the name. Let's try expanding another one. And click this one. And there you have your collapsible view. The most challenging part of this exercise was creating the swipe actions, which are not supported if you want to customize any other behavior than the normal one that cells have in a list. But now you know. Hope you liked this one. See you next time. Bye.